Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about loops, specifically for loops in P5.js, in JavaScript using P5.js, rather. So let's just work from the top down. We'll get to this little variable later. First actually, this is CodePen that I'm using, codepen.io. I have a video that will be somewhere around wherever the link you found to this video in the notes, and that will be a video on how to set up CodePen if you'd like to use it. It's not required by any means. I just find it to be a very helpful tool with quick iterating on sketches and things like that. So check that out if you'd like to. Otherwise, let's dig in. So we start with the setup function. You're all familiar with that. That fires once at the beginning. We create our canvas here that is 500 pixels wide, 300 pixels tall. And we're going to give it a nice minty background color. And I grabbed that color from this handy dandy picker website called hslpicker.com. And you can just pull this. I'm using it for RGB values, red, green, blue. So you can move these sliders around and snag this value here, these three, and then drop it right in here. And that'll change our background to that gross purple, but I like the minty green better, so we're going to stick with that. Anyway, so now we are going to get into loops. So I am using the mouse pressed function here. That fires every time you press the mouse. Pretty self-explanatory. And just to show you some good ways to debug loops, I'm going to start with explaining console log. This is a function in JavaScript itself. This is not a P5 function. The console is an object that is part of the browser. So every browser has a console, and you can find your console by, I'll close mine out, I'll show you how to get back into it. You can find your console by right-clicking, going to inspect, and this will pop up. You may be on a different tab or whatever. The console may not be immediately visible, but if you select console here, that will open up your console. So this is the console right here, and you can see there's already a log in it. So whatever I pass into this log function that we're calling on the console object will spit out here. And you can pass in strings, which is this log colon space in between these quotations here. And then you can hodgepodge whatever else you like. So we're adding this I variable that I declared at the top there. And we can add another string if we want. Hey you guys, this is more string. And when we click again, hey you guys, this is more string. So that's how to use console log, and this is extremely valuable because you get to see where your variables are at. It can kind of tell you if functions are working correctly. It kind of can provide you status updates as you're developing. It's a really useful debugging tool. Every developer I know uses this like crazy. So get very comfortable with that. We're going to use an aspect of the console here called the filter. It's this little icon here. You click that and it activates this little drawer here, and we're going to start it with log. Because now you noticed before whenever I change something, so let's change this again, plus something, it will show, excuse me, this filter is, I want to remove that for a sec, just to show this. So let's remove this, and every time something changes on CodePen, you get these XHR requests. We don't care about those. That's nice, but we don't care. So we're going to filter everything. So hide everything that doesn't start with log. So that's why I'm starting all of my console logs with the word log, so we can filter it. So now every time we press the mouse, mouse pressed fires every time we press the mouse. We are console logging out the value, this string log colon space, plus the value of I. So this should start at 0. So there, log 0, I is equal to 0. Now, when we clicked that, mouse pressed fired. That function fired, which means we got this console log, which means we also added 1 to the value of I. When you call ++ on a variable, that adds 1 to its value. So when we click again, it's going to say log colon space 1. There it is, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, on and on and on and on and on we go. So that is just a quick walkthrough of how to use console log, how ++ works, and how to kind of iterate over a variable like that. So we will get rid of those. We don't need them for now. Now we're going to take our first look at a for loop. This is a single for loop. You can see we've got a nested one here. We'll get into that in a minute. So there's 3 components to a for loop. You have the first one is where you declare your variable. And you can actually declare this variable somewhere else. Like if we wanted to declare it up here, if we wanted to change this to x, oops, that's a C, x equals 4,000. Great. We wouldn't need to declare the equals 5 here. We could just say x, and that would work. X would just start as 4,000 there. But we want it to be 5, and we can get rid of this. So you don't have to declare it here, but it just makes sense to most of the time. So we'll do that for now. This next part is the section that determines how long this for loop is running. Basically what happens every time this for loop evaluates itself, it checks to see if x meets this condition. So x equals 5, we've got that covered. Now it checks to see, is x less than or equal 150? If that is true, if x is less than or equal to 150, let's keep going. If not, we're done. So right now x is 5, we're good to go. It's less than 150, let's move on. Okay, so the next part is, if that is true, we're going to add 5 to the value of x. Plus equals is like ++, but you can choose the number that you want to. So if we just said x++, that would mean x would be equal to 6, but we want to add 5s. We want to add in increments of 5, so we're going to use plus equals 5. And so what happens here is we set x equal to 5, we evaluate it against 150, it's less than or equal to 150, so that's true, so we're going to keep on going. We're going to add 5 to it, but before we add 5 to it, what happens is the code inside gets executed, and then we start over again. So what happens is x is 5, check to see if it's less than or equal, run the code, then do this. So then add 5 to it. So the x plus equals 5 really happens essentially here, just for ease of kind of understanding it visually. But it gets declared up here. So then what you're going to see when I click here, we'll clear this log out over here on the console. What you're going to see when I click is it's going to log out values of x in 5s in the console here, starting from 5 all the way up to 150, and then it's going to create ellipses using these x values. So it's going to kind of go on a line like this, and they're going to get bigger as they go. So watch this when we click here. There we go. So 5 all the way up to 150. So I hope that's a good example of how to use a for loop by itself. Let me know in the JavaScript questions discussion board if you have any more questions about it, if that's not a good explanation. I could definitely go more in depth. Oh my goodness, I missed a semicolon. That's terrible. And another one. Ugh. Totally unqualified for this job. Alright, now we are going to get into a more tricky one, a nested loop. So we'll clear out our console again so we can start fresh. This gets a little bit more tricky, but it uses the very same logic. So x is 5. We're going to evaluate it against 100. If it's less than or equal to 100, we keep going. After all the code runs, we're going to add 5 to it. And then So that is one loop, and then inside of it is a whole nother loop that we've got inside of it. So this loop, so for each time this loop evaluates, this loop does its whole thing. So this loop will run, what, 25 times for each one time this loop runs. And you can see that, so I'll show that'll come out in the console here in just a minute. I'll click, you'll see x equals 5, y equals 5, and then x will equal 5 still, because we're still not done with this loop inside the first time this is running. So you're going to see x equals 5, y equals 5, x equals 5, y equals 10, x equals 5, y equals 15, x equals 5, y equals 20, and so on. And then we'll run that all the way up to x equals 100. So we'll click here, we'll get kind of a funky little design that'll stay up in the top left corner here of all these weird looking spheres, and then I'll kind of walk through what the heck is going on here. So this is actually kind of cool looking. I had no idea it was going to look like this, but I kind of like it. So you can see we got a ton of logs here, and that's because like I said, this for loop that uses y runs 25 times for each time we loop through this x loop. So that means this is running 25 times 25 times. So you can see here we start x equals 5, y equals 5. X still equals 5 because we're in the first iteration of that x loop, but y equals 10. So x still equals 5, y equals 15, x still equals 5, y equals 20, on and on and on and on. So let's do a more compact version of this, just to, so it's not so overwhelming. So let's do this to, let's say 15. So this will only run 3 times, but this y one is going to run 9 times. So click. There we go, we got our 9, oops, let's do that again. So we're gonna click, and we've got x equals 5, y equals 5, x equals 5, y equals 10, x equals 5, y equals 15. So the y loop has now met its, like at the top of its restriction here. So y is equal to 15. So the next time this loop runs, this section of the y for loop is going to evaluate to false, which means it's going to stop. When this loop stops, that means the code inside of this x loop has now finished for the first time. Even though we've already run through everything on this y1, this x1 is still only finished once. So now x equals 10 now, and now we start y all over again. So now here's x equals 10 happens right here. And then y is 5, x is still 10, y is 10, x is still 10, y is 15. And now we're done from the second run through of the x loop. And now x is 15, y is 5, x is 15, y is 10, x is 15, y is 15. Now x equals 20, and x is no longer less than or equal to 15, and now the whole loop is done. So that is... And you can keep going, you can inception this all the way to however confusing you want it to be. We can do a Z one here if you want, and put some code in there and change all these values to, whoops, oh my goodness, I can't multi-cursor for the life of me. Change all these values to Z, and console log out our Z value there, and crazy stuff will happen. So we'll get just a bunch of Z's coming out everywhere. Where are they? Alright, so I hope that cleared up some of the issues you guys were having with loops. Please feel free to let me know if you have any more questions, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do with them. Thanks a lot.